Our first reading this morning comes from Isaiah chapter 35. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty our God. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. And our next reading comes from Psalm 146. Happy are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the strangers. He upholds the orphan and the widow. But the way of the wicked he brings to ruin.
Our Gospel reading is from Luke chapter 1 and verses 46 to 55. Mary said, "My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour. For he has looked with favour on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him, from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and set the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promises he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever."
I first met Michelle Cook when she was a Frontier Services Patrol Minister in Cape York in remote northern Queensland. And at that time she said this, "I no longer think that driving 3 hours is a burden. That is such a short trip in order to visit someone whose child has a chronic debilitating illness. I no longer get too scared from driving down a driveway that's 40 kilometres long, crosses 2 rivers, 3 dry sandy creek beds and 4 gates to go to a home to share in homemade sausages and have a talk about what's been happening. I no longer think that I haven't done my job unless I've prayed with people. Why is this? Because God has asked me to be gentle among the people, to share a gentle love." Michelle and her husband had a baby boy, and from the time Zane was 6 months old until he was 3 years old, when Michelle left the patrol ministry, he travelled the long distances with his mum in those remote areas. In fact, Michelle says it was at a station where he first crawled at 9 months of age. What a start for a life. Zane is now 12 years old and he lives in Darwin with his parents, where his mother teaches theology at Nungalinga College. And she says this: "In my work at Nungalinga, I'm thinking of ways to depict overall structures of books so that their parts can be seen in the whole context. I've been thinking about the Gospel of Luke as a river system. There are waterholes along the way, and the river gets faster and faster until we come to the events of Holy Week. There the water tumbles down over a rocky escarpment and heads out to the estuary into the book of Acts." Thinking of Luke as a river system, I can picture Luke paddling back up that river to its beginning, to the source, to discover and carefully investigate everything there, to get an account from the very first stories of Jesus handed by others, by eyewitnesses of the time, as Luke says. And so the story of Jesus begins with the events leading up to his birth. If you consider it, surely the story of the birth of Jesus, of this baby, would not have been recorded to share so wide if the grown adult Jesus had not made such a deep impact on so many lives at the time, individuals, communities, even those in political power, sometimes who took great offence at his good work and his rocking the boat. And how those stories spread. And we know that many of these stories, and there have been many more not written down, we know some of them ourselves, the birth so significant because of the man and his life. And surely, naturally, the question, where has he come from? Where did he come from? And the answer they must have said, surely it must have been like this. And they gathered the stories together. And some of the parts of the stories have similarities to other great figures in epic eras. And thus we have the beginning of the Luke writings with what we call the Christmas stories. Mary, Joseph, the cousin John, his parents, Bethlehem, the baby, angels, shepherds, distant travellers. Some of you might remember Reverend Steve Koski, who used to be at Braun Place Uniting Church, and he says about these events, and I repeat it as it can be helpful, I believe, for many who struggle with the content of the stories. Steve says, things don't have to be factual to be true. I don't really know what in fact happened or what in faith happened around the birth of Jesus. But he says, stepping into the story with a sense of mystery and wonder, I stumble across truths that take me deeper into my own story and the common story we live together. He says, I can't prove the facts of the story, and to me it's not important. What's important is that I'm confronted with a deep truth in these stories that invites me to say yes to myself, yes to others, and yes to God. Back to the metaphor of the river, Luke reaching back even further than the birth, to the waters of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, to the prophets and to the Psalms, readings much like we heard this morning from Matthew. The desert will blossom, the people will be healed, there'll be singing for joy, there'll be justice for the oppressed, food for the hungry, more than just things we were making, and prisoners set free, hopes and visions for a more just and a better world. Fast forward a few centuries from the Old Testament writings, and we find these convictions written by Luke into the heart and the mouth of Mary in Mary's Song of Praise, read by Beverly. or what we know as the Magnificat, praising God, rejoicing for this special child she is carrying. And her song, the proud are scattered, the lowly lifted up, the hungry filled with good things, the callous rich left out in the cold, Mary's song of radical, disturbing joy. One female minister has written this: don't envisage Mary as the irradiant woman peacefully composing the Magnificat. Instead, see her not only as singing in joy, but defiantly raising her fists against an unknown future. When we do this, she says, Mary's courageous song of praise becomes a radical resource for those seeking to recognise God, where God is, and how we respond amidst suffering and conflicts in real life. Moving forward another 30 years, Jesus begins his ministry and reads out a similar message from the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, proclaim release to the captives, recovery to those who are blind, let the oppressed go free, and proclaim the year of God's favour. And later, John, known to us as the Baptist, sent messengers to ask, are you the one, that is the Messiah, predicted to come, or are we to wait for another? Jesus tells them, go and tell John what you've seen and heard. Blind people see, lame people walk, people with leprosy are healed, the deaf people hear, the dead are raised, the poor have good news brought to them, and blessed is anyone who takes no offence at me. Look at some of the stories about Jesus and his life and works. Remember the story of the men surrounding the woman caught in adultery. They're ready to stone her, and Jesus intercedes. And he says, let those who are without sin cast the first stone, and we can see them slinking away. The occasion and the conversation and the outcome of Jesus with a Samaritan woman at the well. It's easy. It's a well-loved story by me too. Easy to imagine the influence. Don't you think it's easy to imagine the influence by Mary on Jesus? Jesus is influenced by his mother Mary. He must have been. He lived in that family. Frequently throughout history, people on the margins have identified with the powerful poem of Mary and been inspired to believe that God can actually bring liberation to their plight. In fact, in the past century, at least 3 different countries banned the public recitation or printing of Mary's Magnificat. I find that believable. With Mary's words about God's preferential love for the poor, these governments considered the song's message to be dangerously subversive. In India, during British rule, it happened. In Guatemala in the 1980s, and Argentina during the military junta. The German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer preached a sermon before his death at the hands of the Nazis in World War II. He said, the Song of Mary is the oldest Advent hymn. It is the most passionate, the wildest, and one might even say the most revolutionary Advent hymn ever sung. The metaphorical waters of Luke that gushed out into the book of Acts flowed on through our ancestors to us today. What is it that we taste and see and hear and feel? Inspiration, direction, meaning in life, passion, courage, hope, love, respect, maybe even joy. With today's Advent, a celebration of joy, we lit the candle. We had planned to sing Joy to the World, a lusty song of joy. But during the week, we were confronted with local and national grief of the New Zealand White Island volcano tragedy and the disastrous continuing bushfires and the effect on people and the environment. It seemed to me and to some others to sing so loudly of joy to the world, it seemed like an assault on the emotions, at this moment anyway. Today, Reverend Denise Champion, Adnyamathanha woman here in South Australia, and with her book Yardno Wandatha, The Land is Speaking, The People Are Speaking, it's in our library, she begins her song, borrowed from Mary's song, her song to the Most High, to the Mother of Jesus. Denise sings, "My heart sings to God Most High, my heart is happy." And she also sings in that song of her sadness and how the sadness in the heart of God is given to her as well over the history of what has gone on for her people. It's really, really an enlightening book. Today we have our own hearts and minds and experiences. We all matter and all creation matters. We are reminded so much at the moment. In this Advent season, we look into the Nativity, we see the baby Jesus, yet it is the man Jesus, the man, his life and his work that we look to help us today in our lives and in what is happening. Amen.